Hello and welcome to another installment of Going South. Hope this finds you having had and having a good holiday season. I just wanted to make a short video about what the motivation behind this podcast is. It's not to make money and to get tons and tons of views and all that. It's simply uh, based and driven by the fact that I live in a very conservative place. I've grown up here. And over the years, there is a resounding absence of progressive and liberal voices. So it's a very conservative place. The local media is predominantly conservative, local radio is conservative. Um, and I know growing up, I would really, really wish I would have heard adults who offered different viewpoints, liberal and progressive, on social issues, on religion, and a variety of other topics. With that said, we have local media outlets, a local radio station in particular, that 5 days a week, 3 hours each of those days has conservative talk radio. And we also have all the national Rush Limbaugh, the Hannity, and the rest that kind of follow the local show. But on that show, regularly, it's the case that things are said about liberals and Democrats and other people that are just inaccurate and unfair and at times cruel. And over the years, I've reached out to the various hosts of that talk show, attempting to have conversations about those claims and comments. I've even met with the owner of Black Crow Media years ago about this. And all my requests to have a conversation or make space on the air for different perspectives has either been denied or utterly ignored. Most recently, I've reached out to the current host of that talk show. It's called The Morning Drive with Steve Nichols. And Steve seems like a really nice guy. I thought we were going to actually have a conversation at one point, but I've invited him on the podcast in order to talk about things that we might agree on, but also things that he says that I think are inaccurate and unfair, in addition to things that his callers say that are, I think, inaccurate and unfair. Steve recently had two guest hosts on to fill in for him when he's on vacation, two very, very nice people. And I've invited them to come on the podcast, and I've invited them individually and collectively, and explained to them that I would really like to have a conversation. The point of the podcast is not to attack anybody, to create gotcha moments. I'm not interested in that. I'm not interested in being got, not interested in disrespecting or embarrassing anyone. But I would just really like to talk about a lot of things they say. I also shared with them that I feel like this tendency for people with different political viewpoints to talk about one another instead of with one another, which is what happens on these media outlets, is not good for our community, and it's not good for our country. And I think we need to create something that's a little bit different from that. With all that said, nobody has agreed to talk with me. I've even asked, and told folks that if you're not comfortable coming on the podcast, if you could just suggest some people who would, and I haven't had any suggestions. I've also invited the current mayor, who himself had a conservative talk show for years, and I haven't heard back from him either. So part of this video today is just, again, to explain some of the context and reasoning behind this podcast, but it's also an invitation to conservatives to reach out to me, um, and come on and let's talk about these things, these issues, social, political, religious, whatever you want to talk about. I'll be glad to talk about with you. All anyone has to do is send me an email at info@goingsouth.org. There'll be a email address down in the bottom underneath this in the description of the video, so you can find it there as well. If you send me an email, I will do my best to connect with you, and we'll set it up and we'll talk. So um, I all of that concerns me because I think any of us who have a microphone, particularly for almost 15 hours a week, who say things about the other political side and different political parties that are other than their own, I would hope they would be willing to talk about some of the things they say and some of the claims they make. So my invitation to all these folks stands. It's indefinitely extended. So I hope folks will reconsider. And those of you who are watching this, if you know conservatives, supporters of Trump, President Trump, please give them my information and let's try to set something up. With that said, this video is not meant to attack or call anybody out, embarrass again, or to disrespect anybody. But I think it's important to show you some of what I'm talking about that happens on this particular show on a regular basis. And again, it's the motivation for wanting to talk with people and the motivation behind the podcast. So I thought I would share some clips with you from the morning drive, so I could demonstrate to you some of the questions I would ask folks if they were willing to talk with me. Again, not to embarrass anybody or call anybody out, but a lot of things are said that I just think aren't fair. So let me see if I can get my screen to share with you. The first one is Steve himself, the regular host of the show. And in this particular clip, he's talking about why conservatives, what he calls the right, would probably abide by new gun laws. And he makes the claim that conservatives, again, what he calls the right, are basically moral people and everybody else isn't, particularly people on the left. And as a person on the left, and as a person knows plenty of liberals, and for the record on this show, the left is anybody that's not basically a Republican or probably libertarian. So the left is Democrats, it's traditional liberals, and it's also more radical leftist. So I just want to show you a little bit of this clip about what he has to say about guns and gun rights and laws, but particularly his position about what he thinks about the moral character of folks on the left.
People that you're describing on the right, by nature, it's their nature to do what's right, and do what's right has been driven in us all our lives to not break the law, to obey the law.
Right.
And when the law says, if the law turns and says, hey, we're going to do this to your guns, what happens then is you're asking them to go against their nature and break that rule and break that law because we fear the consequences of our actions.
Right.
The problem on the left, they have no fear of the consequences of their actions. That's why they cheat. That's why when they have their gatherings, they wear foam vaginas on their head. They spit on people. They defecate in the streets. They do these things because they have no shame. They have no fear of consequences. Their moral fiber is not what mine is.
Right. I completely agree.
So
let's talk about your first job experience.
Sorry about that. This is a great example of what I'm talking about. I'm on the left. I don't defecate in streets. I don't cheat. I work hard. I'm moral. My moral compass is very well centered. I do my best to do the right thing. And so I think the characterization that Steve's making of the left is utterly inaccurate. And I'd like to hear more about why he feels this way. And again, that's just kind of one of the things I'd really like to talk to him about. But I feel like any given day you can tune into the show and these kinds of comments are made, and he's talking about people like me and people I love, people I know that are great citizens of this country, that do their best to be compassionate and generous and helpful to make and just work to make the world a better place. So this characterization is one of those things that I think is just inaccurate and unfair. And I'm kind of curious about more about kind of why he feels and thinks this way. The next clip I wanted to show you is from a guest host, Dr. Brad Lawson. He filled in for Steve a few days ago. And like I said, I invited him to be on the podcast, and a real nice guy. I like Brad for a couple of reasons. I like each of these folks for different reasons, but It's pretty clear that Brad's a big baseball fan. Brad is, as I said, Dr. Brad Lawson. He is the president of Georgia Christian School. He is a veteran. Again, nice guy, really smart. It's clear that he loves his mom in the episodes, and he attributes his moral kind of grounding to her. And I can identify with that. I had a great mom and a strong mom too, and my ethics really come from her. But there was this particular episode where he was filling in for Steve, and he kind of put the call out to callers to call in and share what their first work experience was. And Brad shared his. He worked at a grocery store in Chattanooga. And kind of the recurring theme that he talked about and the callers talked about was the importance of a work ethic, of doing your job, showing up on time. And the theme was basically kind of these good values around work and being a hard worker. And, you know, I think that's the case for most of us. I can identify and would agree with him on this. But one of the things I wanted to talk with Brad about, I wanted to ask him though, is that, you know, I learned a lot of other things that weren't so good when I went to work in my teens and 20s. I worked at a number of businesses locally. And so I think there are a lot of values that I learned that Brad and the callers didn't mention. And Brad's a little younger than me, but many of the callers were clearly older than me. So we're from kind of the South, kind of the same time period. So I'm wondering if we had common experiences, but none of these other values got mentioned, and they're not. I don't bring them up today to make anybody feel guilty. I don't feel guilty about them. It's just the way it was. But one of the things that didn't get mentioned is growing up in the businesses I worked for. One of the things I learned is that Black people were not going to be hired. It wasn't written on the door. It, you know, is still illegal to discriminate. But since these were kind of white controlled places, it was understood that Black folks weren't going to work there. And since they were all kind of white and typically all male spaces, my jobs were also places I learned a lot of racist stereotypes, a lot of racism in general about anybody that wasn't white. And so that's kind of a value. In addition to kind of a work ethic, it was very clear that we were going to exclude people. And then there were jobs I had where there were Black folks working, and it was very clear to me that they were not treated the same. They were not generally paid the same. They were not in positions of power typically. So I think that's one of the things I would really like to talk to Brad and some of his callers about. Did you have the same experience? I also, in those same jobs, I learned that women weren't supposed to be there. And there were a variety of stereotypes. There was plenty of sexism, plenty of kind of sexual jokes made. And again, as men, that's kind of what bonded us to each other. It's some of the stuff that we would talk about, right? So it was another kind of value, this idea that women were inferior, this idea that women couldn't do many of the things that men do, that women were basically for our sexual pleasure. I learned all that too at my workplaces. So it'd be great to talk to these gentlemen and Brad about this to see if they had a common experience, because I learned about hard work, but I learned about those things too. But, you know, in addition to learning that you worked hard, I will also say that in many of the jobs I had, I also learned that if you worked hard, you didn't get more money. You weren't rewarded for it. So it was kind of foolish to work hard in some places that didn't value you. And some of those places, I also noticed that there were people that were working way harder than me that weren't paid as well as I was. For example, I worked at a local construction company when I was 19. And there were middle-aged African-American men there who had been there for years and years and years. And so we would talk at lunch and other times. One of the things I discovered was they weren't being paid as much as I was. And I was only 19. You know, so this idea that kind of permeated this show, that all you got to do is work hard and everything will work out because we're the land of opportunity. I don't think that's always the case. And I think it also depends on who you are and where you're at. Sometimes that does happen for folks. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes people who don't work hard get rewarded more. Most of the businesses I worked in were owned by the children of other people that started them. Doesn't mean they didn't work hard, but they weren't the people that created them. So all those things kind of got left out of this discussion of work. Um, I was, yeah, let me just show you the next clip, because Brad also makes a comment about wages and work. And I wanted to kind of raise some questions that I'd like to run by him relative to those comments. Again, if I can get this thing to go and bear with me, I'm still learning all this technology. So here we are where he's beginning to talk about work.
You learn, I'd be interested to hear about that. I think about what I got paid an hour. I don't know. I think minimum wage was around $3.30 or something like that. And I think they just passed something down in Florida where it's eventually going to be $15 an hour. And they're changing what they're calling it, at least some people, from a minimum wage to a living wage. And that's, in my opinion, that's not what those jobs are for. All right. My super sacker job was not to support my family. All right, let's hear what some of you all got to say.
So we moved from this kind of work ethic discussion to Brad raising the question about the minimum wage and this idea of a living wage of $15 an hour. And just kind of judging by his tone and his body language, it seems to me that he's got some issues with it. You know, that doesn't feel like many of these jobs were meant to support a family. And I think this question of $15 an hour is a good one. Like, is that going to cause inflation? Is the rise in labor costs going to get passed on to the consumer? There's plenty of things to talk about, but it's clear to me that something bothers him relative to the idea of a living wage. So one of the questions I would like to ask him as it relates to work and this wage issue is, has he ever thought about the fact that the state had to force employers to pay a minimum? I mean, just think about it for a second, that the state had to intervene and create laws forcing employers in this country to pay a minimum amount. We don't have maximum wage laws, but we have minimum wage laws. And I find that really interesting, and I wonder what it says about our economy, and I'd love to know what Brad thinks about it. Not only did employers have to be forced to pay a minimum wage, they had to be forced to limit the work week to 40 hours. They had to be forced to create safe working places and not put workers' lives at risk and expose them to hazardous materials without equipment. All that had to be forced upon employers through the legal system in this country. Employers had to be forced not to work children in factories. So we have a minimum age, right? Those laws came in effect because of the nature of work in our society. So I'd love to hear what Brad has to say about all of that. I'd also love to hear, you know, he's probably 40-ish years old, as my guess, maybe. But I wonder if Brad thinks that work has even changed. And the reason I ask that is because in my lifetime, it has. In the last 2 to 3 decades, there are fewer jobs that pay a living wage, particularly in the Deep South. And I think we can all agree that plenty of factories and corporations have gone overseas to make their products. And they did that because they wanted to run labor costs down. So we've lived in an era of 2, 3, 4 decades where manufacturing has left the United States. And in fact, President Trump said he's going to bring those jobs back, right? So work has changed simply because we don't make anything anymore. We don't have manufacturing jobs to the degree we did in the 1950s. I think another thing that's changed work that I'd love to know what Brad thinks about is technology. There have been plenty of jobs that made obsolete by technological advances. And we see this in our daily life. When I go to Walmart and check out, and I go through the self-checkout aisle, it's pretty clear to me that machines have replaced people. When I go to an ATM, same thing, and we can go on and on and on. But so technology, the economy's changed. We're a service industry job. And I would argue livable wage jobs aren't plentiful in many places in the country. I know I've had a struggle finding jobs over the years, even with a lot of education. So as we talk about a minimum wage and whether people should get a living wage, I think we have to kind of realize that work has changed. And I again wonder what Brad would think about that and if he would agree with me that work has changed. About 20 minutes into this particular episode, Brad says something else about work that I thought addressed the living wage comment that he made. And I just wanted to share that with you. And I think he kind of answers his own kind of question about the livable wage and why there might be a need for one. So let me just play you this little clip.
As I got older, but I was okay. I was pretty good. Loved to play. I think I made the All-Star once or twice. And I was in 8th grade and single mom working at least 2 jobs. So she didn't have a lot of time to make sure I was doing what I was supposed to be doing. And she just had to take my word for it now.
So you may know where I'm going with this. As Brad's sharing that, growing up, you loved to play baseball, makes the All-Star team a couple of times. Again, I'm a big baseball fan myself. In passing, he mentions that his mom, who was a single parent, has to work 2 jobs. And only that, it affected how much she knew was going on with him. So she literally, in his words, had to take his word for it a lot of times. So earlier, Brad is saying, doesn't understand livable wage. Some jobs weren't meant to support families, but in his own experience, he admits that his mom, as a single parent, had to work 2 jobs to make ends meet, to keep her family out of poverty. And I think that's one of the reasons people are pushing for the living wage. And I wonder if Brad would think that as well. I think we also don't ever talk about what it means for a single parent or for parents to have to work multiple jobs to just make ends meet, keep themselves and their families out of poverty, and how much time that takes away from their families. Not only time from their families, but what does it do to somebody that works all the time, physically, emotionally, etc. Right? So I think those are, all important questions that we ought to think about. And it just seemed to me that Brad kind of answered his own question, that his mom, because she was paid so poorly, had to work 2 jobs, and it might have made a difference if she would have been paid a livable wage for one, right? So anyway, would love to hear what he thinks about that. Sounds like he had a great mom, and again, this isn't meant to disrespect him, his family, and it's just something else I'd really, really like to talk with him about. Last, I'd like to shift gears just a little bit, because what's clear to me listening to conservative radio regularly is that there's a lot of fear. People feel like not only are their guns going to be taken away, and I'd love to talk to Steve about that and his idea and support of constitutional carry. But it seems to me that people are on edge about what's going to come if there's political change in our country. And I'm not always clear on who and what group they're most afraid of. So let me just play another little clip, and we can talk about it once it's over.
Override you and let you hunker down and let these people overrun us like they're wanting to do. Now they sit there and they're going to do things to us that's going to be terrible, especially the elderly people. They're going to annihilate them. The ones that do not agree with them, they're going to annihilate them. Now there's several different ways that they're going to do it, and they'll do whatever means is possible. That's just like if our 2 senators that we got running Georgia win, they're liable to start killing people, just like they tried to do up there at Washington, D.C., which nobody seems to even want to talk about because they knifed 4 of our people. And I say ours because they're like-minded people. They may not be the same on everything, but they put forth their fear aside to, have a point of view heard. And I respect them immensely for that.
Okay. As you can hear in this caller's voice, he is deeply concerned about the future. He feels like people are going to die, people are going to be killed, but he says they in this a lot. And one of the things I'd like to talk with him about is, who is they? Is they the Democratic Party? Is they liberals? Is they Antifa? Like, who exactly is they, or is they all the above? I can assure him, as somebody on the left, I don't plan to annihilate older folks. I love older people. I don't plan on hurting anybody. I don't want to be hurt by anybody. But this kind of tone and fear, and I don't want this gentleman to feel this way. I don't want him to kind of carry this around with him. I want him to feel safe. Um, so this happens a lot on the morning drive, where folks kind of call in, or on their message board as well, kind of express feelings that things are going to get really, really bad because of something the other political side is. But I'm not sure what group in that spectrum of people folks are talking about. So let me play a little bit more of what this gentleman had to say and what Brad had to say in response to him.
But you take the. I really got to say right now. I mean, but I just want some food for thought for people to. They need to really understand how many more times are they going to push us. They stole this election. They know they stole it. They're not even arguing that they did steal it. That's what's so unique about this situation, is they never have said a word about they hadn't stolen it. They got videos of them stealing it. But yet, we thought Barr was going to do something. He's part of the swamp. We think that other bulldog-looking guy is going to do something. He's part of the swamp. And that's where we're at now. The swamp has got control back over it again. And it's just to see what we are going to do and how long we're going to tolerate it.
So let me stop this for just a second. I didn't vote for Joe Biden. I'm not a Democrat. Again, I'm kind of left of liberal, consider myself a Christian. The whole discussion and frenzy we have around whether the election was stolen or not, is something I'd love to talk with folks about, and what that means for the country. I will say this. I know liberal folks in my life, and one of the things I don't understand is that it does seem that folks that support President Trump, no matter who says there wasn't systematic voter fraud, that there are cases, both Republican and Democrat for the record, of people doing illegal things with ballots. But when gobs and gobs of Republicans come out, the Brian Kemp, Secretary of State, Christie, attorney generals, who are Republican, the President Trump's own head of cybersecurity, when all these folks say, well, there wasn't systematic voter fraud, it's pretty clear to me that a large percentage of the population that supported President Trump want a particular answer, or at least it seems this way. And if somebody doesn't give them the answer they want, even if they're Republican, that person becomes corrupt, that person becomes a part of the swamp. And I would, again, love to talk about that, and also just find out, well, what exactly do you need to hear? Or is there anything that would change your mind about the conclusions you've drawn about the electoral process this past cycle? So let me finish this one clip that this gentleman kind of had to say, and Brad kind of responds to him with this.
Well, I think that one thing we can agree on is we need to make sure we can do what we can do and not sit at the house and not vote in this election. That's something we all can control. I may not necessarily control who's been appointed to what and what they do when they get there, but we can certainly get out there and vote for.
That's our last thing that we can do. That's the last thing we can do to stop this. And the thing of it is they're going to be deaths. They're going to kill people. They've already killing people now. They're already injuring people, and they're not going to quit. But the thing of it is they're cowards the way they go about it. But we're not cowards, and they better understand that.
It's your people that you're describing.
So, yeah. I'm not sure why this gentleman feels this way. I would love to talk to him about it. It's just that simple. I don't want him to feel this way, particularly if he, if he thinks that I'm in this group or that those folks that don't agree with him politically are some kind of threat to him. I don't think we are. I think we're willing to have conversations, compromise, listen, in a loving, respectful way. So with that said, I will wrap this up. I'm sorry as long as it is. I appreciate the fact that you listened to it this long. I hope that everybody understands that, again, this isn't meant to disrespect anybody. It's again an invitation to my conservative extended family members who are my neighbors, who I love, who I don't want to fear me, and I don't want to fear them. And I hope they will reconsider having conversations with me where we can see where we agree on things and where we disagree. We might find out we're actually more alike than people suspect. People can get in touch with me at info, I-N-F-O, at goingsouth.org. And again, there'll be an email down in the description of this video. With that, thank you again for kind of checking this out. If you know any conservatives that will talk with me, please send them my way if you would. And I hope the rest of the holiday season is a great one. And I hope that we all have a better 2021 than the last year has been. So much peace and love to you all. Bye-bye.